A family forged in the heart. The scream echoed through the hospital corridors at 3 in the morning, cutting through the silence like a blade. Eleanor opened her eyes in the dark bedroom, her heart pounding, her hands instinctively reaching for the belly that was no longer there. The nightmare was always the same. She was back on that polished marble floor, alone, with contractions ripping through her body, while distant voices screamed she didn't deserve help. 12 years later, some wounds still bled in her dreams. What a joy to have you with me. Tell me where you're listening from. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's discover together how this incredible story unfolds. But this time, when Eleanor woke with a jolt, she wasn't alone. Arthur James slept profoundly in the bed next to hers, his teenage legs already too long for the space, his face still holding traces of the child born into her hands 13 years ago. And from the corridor came the familiar aroma of coffee that Alistair prepared every morning before his surgeries, a routine he had religiously maintained for over a decade. Eleanor smiled, chasing away the ghosts of the past. This was her reality now: safety, love, a family she had deliberately chosen to build together. The penthouse that was once her workplace was now her true home. Each room held precious memories: the living room, where Arthur James had taken his first steps; the kitchen, where they had celebrated the boys' every school achievement; the study, where Eleanor had studied for 5 years, until she qualified as a nurse. The floor-to-ceiling windows still revealed the metropolis like a carpet of artificial stars. But now, Eleanor freely ascended to the top floor, sitting on the terrace for breakfast on weekends, watching the city's pulse, which once felt so distant. Eleanor sometimes paused in that living room and remembered with haunting clarity that Thursday afternoon that changed everything. The pain that had started as a low ache and transformed into brutal waves. The exact moment she felt something rupture inside her, the warm liquid trickling down her legs onto the polished marble she had cleaned hundreds of times. The feeling of absolute despair when she tried to reach the telephone and collapsed to her knees alone, with contractions coming one after another without respite, and then the firm footsteps in the entrance hall, the door opening, and Alistair finding her doubled over on the floor. She would never forget the expression on his face in that first moment: surprise, confusion, then an instant compassion that broke her heart. "I need to call an ambulance," he had said, but when Eleanor explained between groans that she couldn't afford private hospital care, something shifted in his eyes. That was when Alistair first comprehended the brutal dimension of inequality he had always ignored. The woman who had cleaned his home for 3 years, who had never missed a day, whom he treated with distant politeness but had never truly seen, was reduced to a state of absolute vulnerability. The birth itself was simultaneously terrifying and miraculous. Alistair on the phone with Dr. Ben Carter, receiving shouted instructions over speakerphone, his hands trembling as he improvised a birthing suite on the living room floor. Eleanor gripped his wrist with desperate strength, whispering between contractions, "If I don't survive, look after my son. Promise me." And Alistair, a man who had avoided any emotional bond since losing his wife Kate and their stillborn son 5 years earlier, heard himself solemnly promise, "I promise, by all that is sacred, I promise." When the baby finally arrived in Alistair's hands, 16 minutes before the ambulance arrived, he held him against his chest, feeling the tiny heart beating rapidly against his palms. It was a small but healthy boy, crying loudly, brimming with life. For the first time since he had buried Kate, Alistair truly felt again, deeply felt. Tears streamed down his face as he wrapped the newborn in clean towels and placed him in Eleanor's arms, who was also weeping, caught between pain and inexpressible relief. The first few months had been a constant discovery. Alistair drastically reduced his surgical hours, delegating cases to registrars so he could be present. He woke up in the small hours to help with bottles, changed nappies with the same surgical precision he used in operating theatres. Eleanor, initially embarrassed by her dependence on his generosity, slowly understood that Alistair needed them as much as they needed him. He was emerging from the paralyzing grief that had consumed him for 5 years, reborn through unexpected fatherhood. The routine they developed was harmonious, yet cautious. Eleanor insisted on continuing to organize the house, but now only for a few hours a day at her own pace. Alistair treated her with respectful gentleness, like someone precious who might break if handled incorrectly. Between them grew a silent intimacy, built on mutual gratitude and growing admiration. Eleanor admired Alistair's dedication to the son, who wasn't biologically his. Alistair admired Eleanor's strength, her ability to rebuild her life after having lost everything. It was Alistair who first mentioned nursing college, an old dream Eleanor had briefly spoken of years ago, when they were still employer and cleaner. "You have a natural talent for caring for people," he said one afternoon, watching her rock Arthur James in her lap. "And intelligence for far more than you realize." Eleanor accepted the proposal with tears in her eyes. At 30, she would return to study, this time with full support to pursue her dreams. On that particular Tuesday morning, Eleanor had a special reason to smile. It was Arthur James's primary school leaving ceremony, and the whole family would be there. She, Alistair, and even Dr. Ben Carter, the obstetrician who had guided the birth over the phone and become the boy's godfather. But there was something else that left Eleanor both nervous and anxious. After 2 years of discreetly dating, Alistair had finally asked for her hand in marriage the previous week. The proposal had happened simply, intimately, in the very same place where everything had begun, the living room floor, now covered by a Persian rug Eleanor had chosen. "I want us to be a family officially," Alistair said, kneeling exactly where he had been 13 years ago, holding a simple yet elegant ring. "Not just for love of Arthur, but for love of you, for love of us." Eleanor still found herself touching the engagement ring, an emerald encircled by small diamonds, delicate as she had always dreamed but never dared to expect. At 40, she felt herself reborn once more. The 28-year-old girl who cleaned houses to survive seemed like a previous lifetime, a different person who had lived on another planet. Now she was a specialist nurse, respected by colleagues and patients, recognized for her dedicated work in the neonatal intensive care unit at St. Jude's Royal Hospital. She had found her calling caring for other babies arriving into the world under difficult circumstances, offering mothers the support and compassion she herself had received from Alistair on that transformative afternoon. Arthur James sprang from bed like a coiled spring, interrupting Eleanor's reflections. "Mum, where's my blue tie, the one that matches my new suit?" He was grown, almost as tall as Alistair, but still held a child's excitement for special events. Eleanor laughed, recalling when he was little and insisted on wearing a tie for any important occasion, imitating the father he unconditionally admired. "It's ironed and hanging in your wardrobe, my love. Go and have breakfast first." The boy dashed to the kitchen, where Alistair was already preparing pancakes, another family tradition for special days. "Our favourite nurse is awake," Alistair said, kissing Ellie gently on the forehead as she entered the kitchen. Even after all these years, he still greeted her with the same respectful tenderness as in their early days, when they were slowly discovering how to be a family. "Are you nervous about today?" Ellie nodded, pouring herself some coffee. "I don't know why. It's just a junior school leaving ceremony, but it feels like the first day of uni." Alistair smiled, understanding perfectly. Every milestone in Arthur's life moved them disproportionately, perhaps because they both knew how differently everything could have turned out. The morning unfolded in typical family preparations. Alistair triple-checked if he'd charged the camera, Ellie ironed their son's smart shirt for the second time, and Arthur James rehearsed his class representative speech in front of the mirror. The boy had inherited Alistair's natural eloquence and Ellie's deep empathy, making him a natural leader among his peers. His teachers always commented on his unusual maturity and his ability to mediate conflicts between children. "He has something special," the head teacher once told Ellie, "a wisdom that goes beyond his years, as if he instinctively knows the value of people." As she watched her family prepare for another important milestone, Ellie reflected on how they had arrived here. The love between her and Alistair had not been born suddenly or dramatically. It had grown slowly, like a carefully cultivated plant. It began with mutual respect, evolved into admiration, then into a silent partnership in raising Arthur James. The first "I love you" was whispered on a sleepless night when the baby had a high fever, and they spent the entire night in the hospital. Ellie was exhausted, worried, and Alistair held her hand, saying, "We'll get through this together. I love you, Ellie. I love both of you more than my own life." It took her months to return the words, not for lack of feeling but out of fear. Fear that it was gratitude disguised as love. Fear of destroying the perfect balance they had built. Fear that Alistair would tire of the responsibility he had taken on. It was only when they completed 2 years as a family that Ellie finally found the courage to say, "I love you too, truly. Not out of gratitude, but for who you are, for how you made us feel whole." The engagement had unfolded as naturally as everything else between them. Alistair hadn't planned the proposal. He simply woke one Sunday morning, watched Eleanor preparing breakfast while Arthur played on the living room floor, and knew he wanted that forever. Officially, legally, symbolically. He knelt in the very spot where it had all begun, holding the emerald ring he had secretly bought weeks earlier, and spoke words straight from his heart. "Eleanor, I want us to be family in every possible way, not just for Arthur's sake, but for ours, for the love we've built together." Her answer was a tearful whisper of yes, followed by a kiss that sealed not just an engagement, but a decade of patiently built trust and true love. Arthur watched it all from his spot on the floor, clapping as if he perfectly understood the moment's significance. "Are we official family now?" the 3-year-old asked. "We always have been, my love," Eleanor replied. "Now we'll just have the papers to prove it." The King's Academy was festively decorated when they arrived. Whole families filled the auditorium, obsessively photographing every moment. Eleanor sat between Alistair and Dr. Ben Carter, who had arrived a few minutes earlier carrying a bouquet of flowers for his godson. "Remember when this lad fitted in the palm of my hands?" the obstetrician whispered, pointing to Arthur on stage. "Now look at him. A young man." Eleanor squeezed Alistair's hand, both deeply moved. They had been through so much together. The sleepless nights when Arthur was a baby, the worries during his first childhood illnesses, the joy of every new word, every good school report, every demonstration of character. When Arthur stepped up to the podium for his speech, the auditorium fell silent. His voice, still changing yet already confident, echoed clearly. "Dear classmates, teachers, and families, I've learned these past years that education isn't just about maths or English. It's about discovering who we are and who we can become. I've learned that family isn't just those who give us life, but those who choose to stay with us and help us grow. I've learned that love is a daily decision, not just a feeling." Eleanor felt tears stream down her face. Alistair squeezed her hand tighter. Those words perfectly encapsulated all of their journeys. After the ceremony, families gathered in the school courtyard for photos and socializing. Arthur James was surrounded by congratulating friends and parents, yet his eyes consistently drifted back to where Eleanor and Alistair stood, as if needing reassurance they would remain. It was a habit he had developed in childhood and never entirely shed, checking that his family was present, available, real. Eleanor recognized this behavior because she herself still did the same, waking some mornings needing to touch Alistair to ensure it wasn't a prolonged dream. "Eleanor," an animated voice called her attention. It was Sarah Thompson, one of the class mums, approaching with a wide smile. "You simply must tell us your secret. Arthur James is the most polite and responsible boy in the class. However did you manage it?" Eleanor chuckled, unsure how to explain. How could she articulate they had raised such a special child, because they themselves had been transformed by unconditional love? How to convey Arthur James was empathetic, because he had grown up witnessing empathy in action every day. "I suppose it's about presence," Eleanor finally responded. "About choosing to be present, even when it's difficult." Dr. Ben Carter approached, carrying Arthur James on his shoulders despite the boy's age and weight. "This one will be a doctor like his father," he declared, setting his godson down. "He already shows such dedication and care for others." Arthur James shook his head, a thoughtful smile playing on his lips. "Actually, godfather, I'm thinking of becoming a lawyer. Family law. I want to help children who need families, and families who need children." Alistair and Eleanor exchanged emotional glances. Once again, their son surprised them with his maturity and purpose. The rest of the afternoon passed in tranquil celebration. They returned home, where Eleanor prepared Arthur James's favorite dish, lasagna with extra cheese. During dinner, they chatted about plans for the school holidays, about secondary school that would begin in September, about small and grand family dreams. It was a common domestic scene, yet each of them knew there was nothing common about their family. They were an improbable constellation, three people who had found each other in the most extreme circumstances and deliberately chosen to love one another. After dinner, Arthur James went to his room to pack for the adventure camp in Surrey Hills that would begin the following morning. Eleanor and Alistair were left alone in the kitchen, washing up together as they did every evening. "Thinking about anything specific?" Alistair asked, observing Eleanor's contemplative face. She smiled, drying her hands on the embroidered tea towel she'd received as a gift from Alistair's mother, Dorothy, a lovely woman who had embraced her immediately as her own daughter. "I was just thinking how lucky we are," Eleanor said, "how everything could have been so different if you hadn't come home early that day." Dr. Alistair Finch stopped washing the dishes and turned to her. "It wasn't luck, Eleanor. It was destiny. I needed to be there. You both needed me, but I needed you too. I was dead inside for 5 years, merely existing. You brought me back to life." He kissed her softly, a kiss brimming with gratitude and promise. "And now we're going to make official what we already know. We are a true family." Eleanor rested her head against his chest, listening to the heartbeat she knew by heart. "When are we going to tell Arthur about the wedding?" Alistair smiled. "Tomorrow night when he gets back from camp. I want him to help us plan everything." That night, after Arthur had fallen asleep, Eleanor and Alistair sat on the terrace watching the city lights. It was a ritual they had developed over the years, talking about their day, planning for the future, simply being together in comfortable silence. "Do you regret anything?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "Opening your home to us? Changing your entire life?" Alistair chuckled softly. "That's a serious question demanding a serious answer," he said, pulling her closer. "I regret not having met you sooner. I regret the 3 years you worked here, Eleanor, and I didn't even know your surname. I regret all the lost opportunities to be a better person before you arrived." Eleanor remained silent for a moment, processing his words. "You know what's strange? I don't even regret the difficult parts. I don't regret having struggled, having been alone during my pregnancy, or having been afraid. Because all of that brought me right here, to you." Alistair squeezed her hand. "And I don't regret having lost Catherine and our first child, however painful it was, because that grief prepared me to recognize the miracle of you too." They fell silent, watching the city that had witnessed their journey. Somewhere below, other stories were unfolding. Other people were meeting, losing themselves, transforming. Other families were being born in unexpected ways. Eleanor thought of the patients she saw at the hospital, the frightened single mothers who arrived at the neonatal intensive care unit. She always told them the same thing. "You are stronger than you think, and you are not alone." It was a lesson she had learned in her own skin. "Alistair," Eleanor said quite suddenly, "I want to do something. I want to expand the foundation we've established. I want to create a specific program for vulnerable mothers, offering not just medical support, but psychological aid, vocational training, and childcare for their babies. A place where they can rebuild themselves, just as I rebuilt myself." Alistair turned to her, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "That's brilliant. We could use part of the hospital's terrace at St. Jude's Royal, transform it into an integrated center. And you could coordinate everything, applying your experience both as a nurse and as a mother who has been through it all." Their conversation stretched into the small hours, planning the project's details, dreaming of the impact they could have on the lives of other women. This was how they functioned together. One inspired the other, multiplying possibilities and hopes. When they finally went to sleep, Eleanor felt a profound sense of completeness she had never imagined possible. At 40, she was beginning the most ambitious chapter of her life, surrounded by the love of a family she had consciously chosen to build. The following morning, they awoke to Arthur James gently shaking them. "Mum, Dad, I need to leave in an hour for the camp bus." Eleanor opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented. Alistair was already getting up, checking his watch. "Come on, family. Last breakfast before our adventurer sets off for the jungle, Arthur James laughed. It's just an adventure camp in Surrey, Dad. Not the Amazon. But they all knew that for them, any separation, even a temporary one, held significant weight. They had learned to cherish every moment together. Breakfast was bustling yet affectionate. Arthur James checked for the 10th time that he had packed all the medicines and emergency numbers Eleanor had insisted on giving him. "Mum, I'll be fine. It's only 5 days." Eleanor hugged her son, inhaling the familiar scent of his hair. "I know, my love. Just promise me you'll look after yourself and have lots of fun." Alistair photographed the moment, another image to add to the albums he had meticulously organized since Arthur James was a baby. When the school bus departed, Eleanor and Alistair stood on the pavement, waving until it vanished from sight. "Empty house for the first time in a long while," Alistair observed. "What shall we do with all this freedom?" Eleanor smiled mischievously. "We could start by planning a wedding. And then we can work on the foundation project and perhaps," she hesitated, blushing slightly, "perhaps we could talk about giving Arthur James a little sibling." Alistair's eyes widened. "Eleanor, you'd like to have another child? With me?" She nodded. "I would very much. At 40 it's still possible, and this time it would be planned, desired, celebrated from the very first moment." Alistair swept her into his arms, spinning her around, laughing with the joyful abandon of a man newly in love. Passers-by smiled, caught in the obvious delight of the couple. "Let's do this properly then," Alistair said, gently setting her down. "We'll get married first, a beautiful ceremony with all our dearest friends. Then we'll grow our family in the most perfect way imaginable." Eleanor kissed him long and deep, right there on the street, oblivious to anyone watching. After so long spent tending to others' happiness, she was finally allowing herself to live her own, fully and without reservation. The next 5 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. They visited potential wedding venues, tasted wedding cakes. Alistair surprised Eleanor with a romantic lunch at the restaurant where they'd had their first proper date, years ago, when they finally admitted their love stretched far beyond gratitude or mere convenience. They worked together on the foundation project, outlining budgets and timelines. Eleanor spoke with hospital administrators at St. Jude's Royal Hospital about her idea, finding enthusiastic support. On the eve of Arthur James's return, they finished setting up what would be Eleanor's home office, a space entirely her own, where she could work on the foundation project and study for future specializations. "I can't believe I'll have my own office," Eleanor said, admiring the oak desk Alistair had commissioned specially for her, with a view of the city and everything. Alistair embraced her from behind. "You deserve this and so much more. You deserve to be seen, acknowledged, celebrated for all that you are." When Arthur James returned from adventure camp in Surrey Hills, sun-kissed and buzzing with tales of nature's adventures, he found his parents evidently brimming with news. During dinner, Alistair formally cleared his throat. "Arthur, your mother and I have 2 rather significant pieces of news to share." The boy stopped eating, giving his full attention. "First, we're officially getting married. We'd like you to be our best man." Arthur James shouted with joy, leaping from his chair to hug them both. "Finally, I've been waiting for ages." "And the second piece of news?" the boy asked, still beaming. Eleanor took a steadying breath. "We're planning to give you a little brother or sister. What do you think?" Arthur James fell silent for a moment, processing the news. Then he said something that moved both his parents deeply. "I think this baby is going to have the best family in the world from day one, unlike me, who had to discover how a real family works." He paused, grinning mischievously. "And I'm going to be the most protective big brother in history." And that's exactly what happened. 10 months later, on a sunny March morning, Iris Eleanor Finch was born in a planned and peaceful delivery, with Alistair holding Eleanor's hand and Arthur waiting anxiously in the corridor. When the nurse brought the baby to meet her brother, the 14-year-old boy cried with emotion. "She's perfect," he whispered, holding his little sister with reverent care. "She'll never go through what I did. She'll know she's loved from the very beginning." But before that, there had been the wedding. Eleanor had chosen a simple ceremony in the chapel of St. Jude's Royal Hospital, the very hospital where Arthur had been officially born, where she had found her calling, where she had met hundreds of families facing challenges similar to her own. The symbolism was perfect. It was there that her new life had truly begun. Arthur served as best man. Dr. Ben Carter officiated the ceremony, and Eleanor's colleagues formed an improvised choir singing Amazing Grace during the bride's entrance. Eleanor wore a champagne silk gown, simple yet elegant, highlighting her mature beauty. As she walked down the aisle towards Alistair, who awaited her with tears in his eyes, she thought of all the women she had met in the neonatal intensive care unit, single mothers, scared, without prospects. If they could see me now, she thought, if they knew it was possible to rebuild everything. Arthur held the train of her gown with adorable seriousness, fulfilling his role as best man with the responsibility of an adult. Their vows, self-penned, encapsulated the entire journey they had shared. Eleanor spoke of second chances, of how love could blossom from compassion and flourish through daily choices. Alistair spoke of redemption, of how two broken hearts could heal one another and forge something stronger than the sum of their parts. There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel when Arthur asked to speak, saying in a steady voice, "Dad, Mum, thank you for showing me that family is about choosing to stay every single day. I promise to look after our family forever." The reception was intimate, held in the penthouse they now called home. Dr. Ben Carter gave an emotive toast. 14 years ago, I helped bring Arthur into the world under the most improbable circumstances. Today, we celebrate not just a marriage, but a family that proves true love transcends blood, social class and conventions. May you be happy forever. Eleanor danced the first song in Alistair's arms, then with Arthur, who was almost her height. The party lasted until dawn, with shared stories, laughter, and the feeling that everything was finally exactly where it should be. Iris's pregnancy was completely different from her first, planned, longed for, celebrated from the very first moment. Alistair attended every antenatal appointment, Arthur James chose his sister's layette, and Eleanor experienced 9 months of serenity that starkly contrasted with the anguish and loneliness she had known 15 years prior. This time she knew an entire family awaited the baby's arrival. The girls' nursery had been prepared months in advance, decorated in shades of pink and gold, with carefully chosen furniture and a mobile of stars that Alistair personally installed. When Iris Eleanor was born, tiny and pink, with dark curls like her mother's and brown eyes like her adoptive father's, Eleanor felt a different kind of love, not greater than what she felt for Arthur James, but different in its simplicity. This daughter was born in absolute safety, surrounded by unconditional love from the very first moment. Alistair cut the umbilical cord with hands that no longer trembled. Eleanor held her daughter to her chest, knowing she would never again experience hardship, and Arthur James waited outside, quietly singing the songs he had learned to soothe his sister. In Iris's first few months, the family found a new rhythm. Arthur James embraced his role as big brother with an adorable seriousness, helping with night feeds, singing to his sister when she cried, protecting her with a fierce yet gentle instinct. Alistair shared parental leave with Eleanor, spending weeks at home, simply observing and caring for his expanded family. Eleanor breastfed Iris in the same room where Arthur James had taken his first steps, feeling the perfect continuity of their intertwined lives. The Eleanor Finch Perinatal Support Trust was inaugurated when Iris turned 6 months old. The project had grown beyond all initial expectations, occupying 2 entire floors of the hospital and offering integrated services to hundreds of women annually. On Inauguration Day, Eleanor gave a speech holding Iris in her arms, with Arthur James by her side, and Alistair documenting it all. "This place exists because I believe every mother deserves support, respect and opportunities, because every child deserves to be born into an environment of love and hope, and because family is what we build with love, not what we receive by chance." The audience rose in a standing ovation as Eleanor concluded, 15 years ago I was alone, pregnant, with no prospects. Today I stand here, mother to 2 wonderful children, married to my best friend, coordinating a project that can transform hundreds of lives. If there is one message I want to leave, it is this: never give up on yourselves. True love exists, second chances are real, and you deserve all the happiness in the world. Iris slept peacefully in her arms, unaware she was witnessing the celebration of a family that had defied all odds to exist. If this story moved you as much as me, click the video now for another tale to stir your heart. Don't forget to subscribe, ensuring you won't miss our next incredible stories.